Rich Lieberman on a Saturday. It is the Bay Area Rich Lieberman Media Pulse. I had to say my name twice because I have no ego, right? Anyway, and by the way, before I get into the spiel, the people that say, "Well, I have no ego," especially those that are on these channels, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitch, it's bullshit. They all have egos. That's why they do it. I'm admitting it. I have an ego, but not as much of an ego as some of these other people, the ones that claim they have no ego. I'm just doing it because I'm an expert on crocheting or 12th round draft picks in the NFL or interviews that I end up kissing the buttocks of said interviewee. Excuse me. I'm drinking water and trying to get this cold from hell. And I'm saying generically it's a cold, but it's more than that. It's something. And I guess my immune system is pretty much fucked up. Sorry to be emphatic with the epithet, but it's right there. It's symbolic. In any event, there's a whole lot going on. Today is my day of reflection. Most people, it's Sunday and they're not doing this. They're getting up, which is always a good thing to do, by the way, when you're getting up and breathing again. Or we all breathe, you know what I mean? When you're awakened. Oh, I have another day left. Okay. So, and this news gets continuing, just complete and utter depression. Billy Joel had to cancel all of his remaining tour dates. And I didn't have tickets for his show at Levi's Stadium come October. But look, I would have loved to have gone. And in case you didn't know the news or hear the news, Billy Joel has some kind of an issue with, this is scary, his brain. It's like excess fluid that compresses, and if you leave it alone, it could degenerate into something far more worse and compelling in a negative way. So, excuse me. He canceled all his remaining tour dates, including the one down in Santa Clara for October. So there goes that. And they didn't say whether or not, and he didn't indicate, Billy Joel himself, whether or not he's going to be back. I would assume, but he is 76. This is something that, this is not a toothache. But it reminded me when I heard about this, obviously, like everybody else, especially if you're a Billy Joel fan, I felt melancholy. I was bummed. But then I read some other articles, and they, with time, maybe this thing could actually heal itself. But anyway, you're dealing with your brain and the head and all that. Again, this is no stomach ache. But it reminded me of one of his big songs, and I'm a Billy Joel fanatic. I have often told people, they've asked me, who would you pay to go see? As an artist, what have you, that kind of thing. And there's very few people. But off the top of my head, I answered, well, Billy Joel, Elton John, and probably Bette Midler. Somebody says, what, not Streisand? Not Streisand. Barbara Streisand, as great a voice as she had, still has, as she's over the age of 80, she's not really a great performer, which is one of the main reasons why she very rarely performed. And she only performed 20 years ago because and she's a multi gazillionaire, but the money was just so outrageously high that even Barbara Streisand said, "Yeah, okay." And my older sisters, I chipped in a little bit too. By the way, this was years ago, but they got her a. They took my mother. It was my mother's like 75th birthday, and they went down to Vegas at the MGM Grand, where she was performing with Frank Sinatra, and she was the headliner. And Sinatra opened up, and then they did songs together and all that. Anyway, um, it was like $1,000 to sit even close to the stage, and it was nutty. And anyway, they got my mother these great seats. They took my mom, and my mom doesn't give a damn. I told you before. I told her to go see E.T., and she thought it was kind of stupid. But I'm laughing because I think she said something like, "Well, it looks like that character from what was it? Star Wars." It being E.T., and it was funny because like I said. But anyway, my mom enjoyed the concert, and it was a really great show. All right, so back to the main premise. So Billy Joel had to cancel all his tour dates, but he had that song, "Scenes from an Italian Restaurant." Maybe I'll post it later. But and it's very, very long, and it's like a melody that goes on and on, but it's a great, great song. And one of the most famous lines from the song "Scenes from an Italian Restaurant," which I know you have to know it. Bottle of white, a bottle of red, perhaps a bottle of rosé. It's there. I'll meet you anytime you want in our Italian restaurant. You know that? Okay. And then he goes into a different mode of the song later. And one of the central lines is, "From the summer of 75. Then they decided it would be." Okay. From the summer of 75. Well, it's 2025, and my math, should it be correct, and I think it is, we are now 50 years from the summer of 75. And it's a cliche. I'm still going to say it. Oh my God, how time flies. Now, for the record, I was 13. I was bar mitzvahed in, what was it, February of 75. And it was one of my favorite years. I mean, we're all younger. Of course, it's going to be our favorite year. But for me, 75 was, talk about my age of innocence. But I distinctively remember in the Bay Area, growing up in Oakland as a kid, taking BART, going to the city. And that was the era, folks, where the culture was pretty limited, but nevertheless, it was pretty cool. You had, well, I mentioned Billy Joel, who would make his huge, huge debut a couple of years later. But we had everything. Mass media was pretty much centralized on TV, radio. There was no internet, but we had things that were sort of precious to us, right? Channel 7, KGO TV, San Francisco, and of course, KRON and KPIX and KTVU. And, excuse me 1 minute. Do you remember the streets of San Francisco? Well, well, 75 was its heyday. And if you were around San Francisco at the time, they filmed it, of course, mostly, obviously, in San Francisco, down by the waterfront area, the ferry building. You could see the LTDs, which is the great reminder of 75. Carl Malden, Michael Douglas, the Quinn Martin production theme song, "The Streets of San Francisco," right? 1975. But San Francisco was incredible back then. Again, I'm a kid, 13, right? In the beginning of junior high, and everything was kind of pure. Thank God we didn't have an internet back then. Well, we did, we just didn't know we had it. There was computers, but there were those big things that you saw in the movies. And by God, did we have movies? We didn't know back then that bump, 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 Jaws. And that was a huge, huge. And think about it, folks. Those of you who, saw Jaws, I'm sure you did. Even if you didn't see it back then, I'm sure you've seen it on cable. You try a movie like that today, it would be an out and out bomb, right? But the movie was so fantastically acted. I mean, look at the luminaries: Richard Dreyfuss, Roy Scheider, all even the character actors, the sheriff, and all the bit actors. But and anyway, it was a huge, huge, huge hit. Spielberg, one of his first major hits. I think maybe American Graffiti was out there, but it didn't make anywhere near what Jaws made. And when you first heard about it, oh, killer shark, you laughed, right? And I remember distinctively when it debuted in August of 1975, right? So towards the end of summer, but we had so many things culturally, electronically happening. And I mentioned some of the TV stations here. I mentioned the fact that KGO was just beginning to begin its mass following. And it was big earlier than that, but it was beginning to get traction and become the centerpiece for radio news talk. Ron Owens debuted in 75. Of course, we had Owen Spann, Jim Eason, Dunbar. Those of you that don't remember him, Jim Dunbar. The news. We had great street reporters, not just at KGO, but at KCBS, KGO. Dick Leonard, Harv Morgan, KCBS with Bob Melrose, and people like Clancy Cassell and Dave McElhatton and all the various people that made KCBS great. Barbara Taylor, I don't believe she was there then, but she was just beginning her broadcasting career. The late Barbara Taylor, the City Hall reporter at KCBS. But you had various characters. We had, of course, George Moscone was the mayor. We didn't know what would befall Mayor Moscone, one of the best mayors in San Francisco at the time. Joe Alioto was up there too. I was more of a kid when Alioto had his centerpiece. But Moscone was great. And we had characters. I mentioned, I'll never forget the Hookers Ball. Remember that? At the Cow Palace? And we had Halloween, which was a big to-do. Still is today, even bigger. But back then, you had this thing called the Hookers Ball. And it was at the Cow Palace. And I'll never forget the chief of police for San Francisco, a guy by the name of Charles Gain. He used to be the chief of police here in Oakland. And very controversial. The rank and file at both departments was not a fan. But Gain was photographed at the Hookers Ball. And he said he was doing something for research. Yeah, some research. But in protest, the cops in San Francisco, especially the ones on their motorbikes, they put American flags on the back of their motorbikes to, I guess, show their disdain for Charles Gain. In any event, We had that going on. We had Herb Caen becoming this huge entity. I mean, he been obviously very famous and huge before that. But Caen began to get this sort of situation where he wrote about some of the various goings on, like the streets of San Francisco and the characters, restaurants. We didn't have to worry about the crap that I don't want to say so much worry about, but we frown and shake our heads today. What's happened to downtown San Francisco? But you had all those elements. You had characters I mentioned, North Beach, Gino and Carlo, the Carol Doda at the Condor. Again, I'm 13 years old. I only heard of the stories. I wasn't able to partake in the experience that was Carol Doda. We had Saturday Night Live. Folks, forgive me for this, but I'm just trying to get myself back together and fight off these amazing things, and I'm not going to get into detail. I know some of you are still eating your breakfast or dinner or lunch, or whatever. But we had so much going on, and we didn't have some of the distractions that we have today. And some of them are really, really serious, as we all know. But we had tragedies and things in the Bay Area like the zebra murders. Of course, Patty Hearst, that happened a year earlier. But in 75, they captured her along with, remember the SLA, Bill and Emily Harris at this little house on Morse Street, which is still there, by the way, and probably worth about $2 or $3 million because every house in San Francisco, even in today's times. So they caught Patty Hearst, September 1975. And we had so many other things nationally. The beginning of Saturday Night Live and the Blues Brothers debuting back then. Who knew they would become megastars about 2.5 years later. Chevy Chase and George Carlin and all the great things that were prominent in 75, especially the summer of 75. And in the Bay Area, well, less meaner times. We had our tragedies. We had things taking. Remember all the hijackings that were going on? Remember what was happening at the airports? You didn't have to show your ID. Well, you did, but you didn't have to take half your clothes off and shoes. And it was a little bit of a more innocent time. And I mention all these things because, to me, 75 was quite magical. I was in junior high. Obviously, I'm 13 years old. And we had that taking place in the fall of 75. And then, of course, the beginning of the year of 76. Remember the snow? And this was honest to goodness snow. This was not stuff in the hills. This was snow at sea level. In February, and it was actually February the 5th, 1976, a Thursday, 2 inches of snow near San Francisco, up on the hills and in the Marin Headlands. You could look at pictures on the internet. We were all marveling because snow came down in droves. 2 inches, it's quite a lot. And as I stated, even at sea level. And it was quite a time. Remember that vividly like it was yesterday. I mentioned some of the TV stations. Well, of course, KGO was in its heyday. And Van Amberg and Jerry Jensen and Peter Giddings doing the weather. And John O'Reilly doing sports. And Cron was still doing its magical thing. And limited as it was still a powerhouse. and KPIX, the CBS affiliate. It was not an O&O back then. It was owned by Westinghouse. And they were located a stone's throw down Van Ness from Cron. Cron at 1001 Van Ness, and KPIX, I believe they were on Van Ness, but farther down, like you were headed towards Lombard. I don't know the cross street, but somebody will know it and point it out. But you had that going on. And by the way, 3 years later, 5 actually, 1980, KPIX would move from its Van Ness studios to the corner of Broadway and Battery and become the powerhouse that it is today and owned by CBS. But forgive me one sec. Excuse me. See, you get sound effects here. But the Bay Area was kind of a cool place. It was San Francisco, Oakland with its magical sports teams like the A's, 3 straight World Series championships. The Warriors on May 25th, 1975. The anniversary is coming up on Sunday. The Warriors swept the Washington Bullets. They defeated the Bullets on Sunday, May 25th, 1975, thus completing a 4-game sweep, one of the most underrated marvels in all of sports. So they beat the Washington Bullets. They were tremendous underdogs. That happened in May of 75. And I remember all the various things taking place. We had the concerts, of course, Day on the Green with Bill Graham at what they called it the Oakland Stadium. It was the Oakland Coliseum. They had it at the outdoor stadium, and they had the Dead, Grateful Dead, the Eagles, and these, Steely Dan, these perennial 1970s groups, and big, huge, 55, 60,000. That was the big to-do in the 70s, and they called it a Day on the Green. And all the rock stars would play at the Oakland Stadium. I mentioned the Grateful Dead, the Eagles, Hall & Oates, Billy Joel, but Billy Joel wasn't as huge as he was today. But they had these groups and all these people. And there was a wave of smoke, if you know what I mean. They would come, excuse me, wheezing, and play the stadium. And it was a huge to-do. One of the big cultural things in 1975 in the Bay Area. And of course, I mentioned Saturday Night Live. Remember this? Courtesy Chevy Chase, Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead. And those of you who know what I'm talking about, you're chuckling. Those of you that don't, just do a Google search and put in Generalissimo Francisco Franco. You'll understand why some people are chuckling and the others who don't get it are perhaps saying, what the hell is he talking about? Okay. By the way, Saturday Night Live debuted in September 1975, and the first host was George Carlin, okay? And we had other things taking place. I mean, it was a big, big to-do. But it was one of those years that when you look back, I can't fathom that was 50 years ago. That's half a decade, or half a decade. That's 5 decades. Boy, am I screwed up. 5 decades, half a century. And it just seemed things are a little bit more. And by the way, I don't want to come off, as one of these old guys. When I was your age, Sonny, hamburgers were minus 5 cents. That's right. They used to pay us to eat them. I don't want to come off like that. But it was. And I know in 75, probably, there were people like, oh my God, 50 years ago, it was 1925. And things were probably a lot better in 25. No, they weren't. We were embarking on a depression. But anyway, one sec. So I wanted to reflect on 75 because it was so many things. I didn't even mention some foodies. Remember the It's It? I still think they make it, but not in the Bay Area. But it used to be a chocolate ice cream bar, and it was called an It's It, and it's still out there. But it was a graham cracker, and then it was vanilla ice cream coated in chocolate, and they had a graham cracker, and it was called an It's It, and it was Nirvana. Oh, is it good? And of course, the corn dog, which in my book is one of the best guilty pleasure foods. And used to get them. I got them the best. And I know all the county fairs have them and all that. But my family, when I had a family, we used to go to Santa Cruz quite a bit. And you'd get them at Santa Cruz at the beach boardwalk. They're the best. And it was the real McCoy, the battered shit surrounding the hot dog, and you put some mustard on it, and you were in hog heaven. And saltwater taffy. I wasn't a saltwater taffy guy. I don't know who ate them, like people from another planet. I guess the kids liked them, like, cotton candy. Saltwater taffy, But if you like that and corn dogs, you were at Santa Cruz. Excuse me again. More sound effects. Finally, and by the way, thank you for taking this time symbol back in time to an era when it was cooler, people were nicer, the arts were a lot more engrossed, movies were better, the actors were movie stars, we had real actors. It was just a better time, in my opinion, of course. No, whose opinion otherwise, Rich? I understand and agree. So this was a day of reflection, and God willing, various times I'm going to go back and try to talk about various media and what they were doing back then. Not just 75, but we might talk about Barbara Walters. Remember, she debuted as an anchor, first woman anchor on a network news in the fall of 76. That didn't work out, but it was a big to-do back then. But we might talk about ABC and the various news anchors and reporters and radio. And if you have a suggestion, please email me. It's rich.lieberman@gmail.com. And if it sounds interesting, we'll talk about it. Okay. So finally, very important, folks, if you like these kind of shows, and if you like my show in general, and by the way, I've been out trying to raise some money just to stay alive, show wise. Please make a donation. No donation is too small, and no donation is obviously too big. My magic number is $15, and you'll become a subscriber of 415 Media and help me. What is $15? Well, it's a very small amount. I keep mentioning this. If you donate $15 or more, but $15, that's $1 a month plus $3. And I will give you a quality show or shows depending upon news. And I'm not just going to give you scoops, which I will, though. I'm going to give you opinion. I'm going to give you raw commentary. And I'm not going to be, just as I am today, beholden to advertisers, which is one of the reasons why I don't put up advertising. Now, having said all that, if you have a small hardware store or a business, or you're a plumber, or I don't know, maybe a lawyer, and you want to advertise on my show, then of course I will take that because you're an independent, you're not a conglomerate or a big company. And what does it cost? Why don't you email me or give me a call directly, 415 999. That's 39 4454. And we'll talk about something that you will like, and I'm sure will fit your budget, assuming you have one. So please make a contribution. Just go up to my PayPal icon, click on it. I take everything. If you want to make a cash donation, if you want to put it on a credit card, maybe you get some points from credit card usage. In any event, $15. If all of you watching right now, right this instant, literally, were to donate $15, well, I wouldn't have to constantly nag you about donating, because there's a vast amount of you would help me. And what does that do? The money. Well, I pay my internet bills, my 415 media obligations, and that's high speed and cell phones and all of that time, because I go out and investigate stories that I get, tips, some of which pan out, some do not. But nevertheless, you will get from me not just my opinion, my commentary, my take, information, but scoops. And the non-BS scoops, the real McCoy. I will give you the lowdown, not the, as I call it, PR press release, the spin that they want you to know about. They don't want you to know anything more than that. So please, folks, make a donation, make a contribution. And those of you who have donated in the past and have repeated to donate many, many a times, and you know who you are. Jeffrey Cox and Mr. Tam and oh my God, so many people. I don't want to name their names because they haven't given me permission, but you know who you are. Thank you, thank you, thank you. People have told me, I don't agree with you, Rich, but I like the fact that you state your feelings, hide behind the computer. Your name is up on the masthead and all that. And I'm also, folks, live. No notes, no preconceived or rehearsed things to say. I am live every day when I'm not sick and wheezing and coughing. Stay indoors. If you go out, make sure you take all your meds. Get vaccinated. Listen to the doctors and science. That's my only pontificating today. Because as one of my doctors and many doctors have stated, there's a whole lot of crap out there that a lot of us don't even know about. Whether it's a virus, whether it's flus, whether it's whatever, it's affecting us. And by golly, do I have stories to tell, hopefully. So in any event, this is a Saturday. If you're watching live, thanks for watching. If you're watching later on, great. Tell your friends, your enemies, your priest, your rabbi, your ex-spouse, your current spouse about me. Please, at the very least, subscribe to my channel, and I promise you the very best, and not just information, but entertainment. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.